Hi everyone, Dale Norman here with Theologian Sphinx. I want to do another video for you today. We're responding to some of the things that was raised in the Armageddon section of the film. And one of the things that came up was the different ways you can read the book of Revelation. I'm going to share with you 3 different methods in which the book of Revelation could be read. Alright, the first one would be the straight line that you see there. That is the idea of a straightforward chronological sequence. In other words, yes, you would read the book of Revelation as if it was predicting in order what is going to happen. Now, the question is, what is it predicting, or what is it counting down to? Now, for those who take the futurist view, that would mean that they would see that as a prediction leading up to the end of the world, basically, and when Christ would return onto earth to reign here. One of the problems with that is, first of all, some of the issues we've already discussed with futurism in the past videos, but you would have to separate or place a large gap after chapter 3. What would be the connection between those 7 churches and then leading up to the end of the world? So you would have to ask yourself that question, why would John write to these 7 churches and then talk about the end of the world? It could be that John was predicting something else, maybe a straightforward countdown to something that was happening in the 1st century that would connect it then to the 7 churches. So that's something to think about. Interestingly, though, it's interesting with that the book ends with going back on Earth. The nature of apocalyptic writing, don't forget, is the idea of God looking down from heaven and the author, taken up into heaven, shown all these things on earth from heaven's perspective, and then you go back down onto the earth. So that's pretty much the nature of apocalyptic writing. It's giving you different perspectives of earth from heaven's point of view. Now, that leads us to our second way of reading the book of Revelation, which is the circle. That is basically a repetitive cycle. In other words, this means you read the book of Revelation not as a straightforward chronological sequence, but rather as a book that is repeating the same point over and over and giving you different angles of the same point. Now, the question to ask is, what is the point? What is the thing that it's trying to emphasize? Well, there are many different themes. I think one of them would be the nature of God in the world, the nature of good over evil in the world. When you read Revelation, we're dealing with this empire that was persecuting the saints and killing God's people, and the message really is, hang on in there, endure to the end. I am with you in your suffering. So really, Revelation circles that point over and over with many different angles. First, he addresses them on earth with the 7 churches. He shows them the throne room, and then we're given some apocalyptic visions of horsemen and plagues. That sort of emphasizes the Old Testament narrative of the Exodus. But one of the repetitive themes is the earthquake. I think the earthquake is mentioned at least 3 times, chapter 6, chapter 11, and chapter 16. The sun is repeated a lot. Chapter 6, I think again in chapter 16, of it going dark and it scorching the people. You'd have to ask yourself, well, how many times can the sun turn black or scorch people? Is it maybe repeating the same point over and over? So those would be some of the obvious themes that would come up. John wanting to remind his readers of the victory of Christ in the midst of their circumstances. Now, that does lead very nicely then into the third way of reading Revelation, which would be the rectangle stairs that you see there. This would be the idea that Revelation is predicting a sequence, but it's repeating and enlarging it every time. So basically, he's revealing something to you, then he goes back to the beginning, but gives you a larger picture this time. Now, some people see the number 7 in the book of Revelation quite a significant thing. Some people see that the the 7 seals is the same as the 7 trumpets. And those events is also repeated then in the 7 bowls. So this way of reading it would give you a sequence, a countdown, but that doesn't mean the entire book is the countdown. Unlike the first way that we talked about, this rather sees it as a section, going back over it, and then giving you more. The best example of this would be Daniel the book of Daniel, we have the sequence of events in chapter 2. We have them again in chapter 7, but this time a little bit more detail. And then we have the same sequence in chapter 8. Again, another large sequence, or the same sequence getting larger. And we have the same sequence again in Daniel 11. All those list of kings is the same sequence in Daniel 2 and 7, but it's enlarged, repeat and enlarge. So yeah, that's something to think about. What are the ways you can read the book of Revelation? And I'm sure these are not the only ones. Now you may be asking, which one do I tend to turn to? Probably not the first one. I do think there is a bit of the second one, a repetitive cycle, John going over things. But because of the Olivet Discourse and Jesus' predictions of what would happen leading up to the destruction of the temple, and I believe John is the same John as the apostle who wrote the book of Revelation, there would be some sort of countdown to something, whether that would be the Jerusalem siege, so maybe the repetitive cycle, repeat and enlarge, would also work as well. So yeah, take this away with you and see what you think.